Picture this. You're standing in the grocery aisle. You grab a golden bottle of honey and you feel good about it. It looks pure. It says natural, maybe even raw or organic. You drizzle it into tea for your immune system, onto toast for your kids, or into oatmeal because you're trying to pick the healthy sweetener. But here's the uncomfortable truth. A huge portion of what's sold as honey today is so heavily processed, diluted, or mystery sourced that it barely resembles what actually comes out of a hive. In some cases, it isn't much more than glorified sugar syrup in a pretty bottle. Today on Plate Safe Project, we're going to walk through 7 big red flags that your honey might not be what you think it is. And then I'll show you 2 ways to find the real stuff that actually respects your health and your wallet. This isn't about fear. It's about knowing what's in your pantry so you can make better choices the next time you pick up that golden goodness. Before we dive in, quick reminder. This video is for education and entertainment only. I'm not your doctor, and I'm not accusing any specific company of what they're doing today. Ingredients and sourcing can change. And we're looking at patterns that have shown up in investigations, lab tests, and industry scandals, and turning those into simple rules you can actually use when you shop. Red flag number 7, honey that looks too perfect to be real. If your honey is crystal clear, identical from bottle to bottle, and pours like machine oil, no matter what the temperature is, that's a sign of heavy processing. Many large packers heat honey to high temperatures and run it through ultrafine filters so it stays smooth, shiny, and liquid on the shelf. It looks beautiful, but the trade-off is that pollen, tiny bits of wax, and a lot of the natural enzymes get stripped out in the process. And several investigations have shown that a big share of supermarket honey samples contained little or no pollen at all, which also makes it almost impossible to trace where the honey originally came from. When there's no pollen, you lose both nutrition and transparency. So what does real, less processed honey usually look like? It's rarely perfectly uniform. You might see cloudiness, slight color variations, or a thin layer of crystals forming at the bottom of the jar. It may pour more slowly, especially when it's cool. That natural variation is a feature, not a flaw. When you see honey that looks as consistent as corn syrup, especially in cheap plastic bears or giant jugs, that's your first clue that something about it has been engineered more for shelf appeal than for integrity. Red flag number 6, rock bottom prices that don't make economic sense. Beekeeping is not cheap. Between hive maintenance, transportation, and the risk of losing colonies, it costs real money to produce a pound of true honey, yet you'll sometimes see huge bottles of pure honey priced cheaper than what many beekeepers can even produce wholesale. How does that happen? It usually means one of 3 things. The honey has been cut with cheaper sweeteners like corn or rice syrup. It's coming from parts of the world where anti-dumping duties or other costs are being dodged. Or it's been aggressively blended from multiple low-cost sources with very little oversight. For you, that means a product that behaves more like liquid sugar than honey. These bargain bottles often stay runny forever, never crystallize, and taste one-dimensional. Just loud sweetness with no floral or herbal notes. If the price looks too good to be true, especially on a huge bottle from a big box or discount store, assume you're paying for shortcuts somewhere in the supply chain. Real honey simply can't be produced, shipped, and sold for pennies per ounce without corners being cut. Red flag number 5. Vague or missing origin information. Flip the bottle around and look at the fine print. Does it proudly list a region or a country, or does it hide behind phrases like blend of honeys from multiple countries or no origin statement at all? That kind of vagueness is a classic sign that the packer wants maximum flexibility to buy whatever is cheapest that week. Over the past 2 decades, government investigations have uncovered schemes where imported honey was mislabeled, routed through third countries, or declared as other products entirely to avoid tariffs and extra scrutiny. In some cases, the honey was found to be heavily diluted with syrups or contaminated with residues that wouldn't meet tighter standards. When you buy honey with no clear origin, you're also giving up your ability to hold anyone accountable if something goes wrong. If there's no way to tell which country it came from or which batch was involved, all you're left with is a mystery squeeze bottle and a lot of trust. Look instead for labels that clearly state a country of origin, or better yet, a specific region, and avoid anything that seems intentionally fuzzy. Red flag number 4, honey products that quietly admit they aren't really just honey. On crowded shelves, it's easy to overlook a single word. Maybe the bottle says honey blend, honey sauce, honey product, or with honey flavor. Those tiny additions are giant warning signs. They often mean you're buying a mixture where real honey is just one ingredient among corn syrup, sugar, flavorings, or thickeners. The front label might show a dripping honey dipper and a field of flowers, but the ingredient list tells a very different story. These products behave like the ultra-processed syrups they are. They spike blood sugar quickly, but they don't bring along the same mix of enzymes and naturally occurring compounds that raw or minimally processed honey does. If you're choosing honey because you think it's a slightly better option than straight table sugar, these blends basically wipe out that advantage. The fix is simple. Look for a label that lists a single ingredient, honey, and skip anything that needs a long paragraph of extras to taste sweet. Red flag number 3. Honey that takes organic or natural claims at face value without context. A lot of people reach for organic honey thinking it means pesticide-free nectar in every spoonful. The reality is more complicated. Bees can fly for miles in every direction, and they don't read property lines. Even if a beekeeper follows organic practices around the hive, the bees may still visit flowering plants in fields that are treated with herbicides or other agricultural chemicals. That's why surveys in several countries have occasionally found traces of pesticides, including glyphosate, in samples of both conventional and organic honey. The levels are typically low, but for people trying to limit their exposure, it's a reminder that the label has limits. Does that mean organic honey is pointless? Not at all. It often reflects better standards on the keeper's side, and it can be part of a better choice. But the smart move is to treat organic as one data point, not a magic shield. Combine it with other clues, where the honey is produced, whether the brand shares third-party test results, and how heavily processed it looks. If a jar leans hard on marketing buzzwords but tells you almost nothing concrete about sourcing or testing, that's a reason to be cautious. Red flag number 2. Honey with no story, no pollen, and no signs of life. When independent labs have examined honey from large retailers in the past, a striking portion of supermarket samples had all or nearly all of the pollen filtered out. From a regulator's point of view, that's still legal. From a consumer's perspective, it's a problem. Pollen isn't just a minor extra. It's one of the main ways scientists can tell where honey came from. Take it all away and you erase the fingerprints. You also remove part of what makes honey interesting nutritionally. If your honey is always perfectly clear, never crystallizes, and has no aroma beyond plain sweetness, you're probably dealing with something that's been processed to death. It may technically still be honey under the label, but it's lost much of what people traditionally value it for. Real honey can give off different scents depending on the flowers involved. It will eventually crystallize, especially in cooler weather, and under a microscope, it should show a diversity of pollen grains. You might not be able to see those grains at home, but you can notice when everything about the product feels oddly sterile. Red flag number 1. Anonymous bulk honey with no brand and no accountability. You'll sometimes see giant tubs or unlabeled squeeze bottles at discount stores, flea markets, or in sketchy corners of the internet. The price is low, the label is generic, and details are almost non-existent. This is where a lot of the worst honey fraud historically hides. Past enforcement actions have uncovered huge volumes of imported honey that turned out to be heavily diluted with other sweeteners, mislabeled to disguise its origin, or contaminated with residues that wouldn't meet stricter standards. Once that kind of product is repackaged into a plain bottle with a vague label, there's almost no realistic way for the average shopper to tell what they're getting. If there's no brand taking responsibility, no way to trace the country of origin, and no batch code or website to check, your safest move is to walk away. The small amount of money you save at the register isn't worth gambling on something that might be little more than industrial syrup. When it comes to anonymous bulk honey, the Plate Safe Project rule is simple. If you can't see the chain of responsibility, you probably don't want it on your plate. All right, that covers the red flags. So what actually is worth putting in your pantry? Let's reverse the script and talk about honey that earns a place at your table. First up, raw or minimally processed honey from producers who actually tell you who they are and where the bees worked. A lot of smaller or mid-sized companies now lean into transparency instead of hiding from it. They'll tell you which region their honey comes from, whether it's mostly clover, wildflower, orange blossom, or another floral source, and they often share details about third-party testing for purity. Some brands, like Nature Nates in the United States, specifically advertise raw or unfiltered honey and talk openly about testing batches for things like added syrups and certain residues before putting their name on the label. That doesn't mean any brand is perfect, but it does mean you have a traceable company standing behind the product and putting details in writing. When you open a jar of this kind of honey, you'll often notice it looks and smells different from the ultra-polished stuff. It may be cloudy, it may crystallize over time, and the flavor can shift slightly from batch to batch. That's a good sign. It means you're dealing with a food that still behaves like a natural product. For many people, raw or lightly warmed honey like this is what they're actually hoping for when they reach for honey to sweeten tea, soothe a scratchy throat, or drizzle over yogurt. If you want to stack the odds in your favor brands that talk about their beekeepers, explain their testing, and don't try to hide normal variation. The second solid option is specialty honey with rigorous grading and independent verification, especially when you're willing to pay more for potential functional benefits. A good example is genuine Manuka honey from New Zealand. Real Manuka is produced when bees forage on Manuka bush flowers, and many producers submit their batches to certified labs that measure key compounds, often expressed as MGO or UMF numbers on the jar. Brands such as Wetherspoon and other reputable New Zealand producers publish these ratings and emphasize traceability from hive to home, so you can see that the honey truly comes from where the label claims. Manuka honey has been the focus of a lot of research into antimicrobial and wound care applications, and hospitals in some countries even use medical-grade versions under professional supervision. That doesn't turn a retail jar into a miracle cure, but it does highlight that some honeys are more than just flavored sugar. If you're going to invest in an expensive jar, look for clear grading systems, third-party verification, and packaging that explains exactly what those numbers mean. When a brand is willing to tie its reputation to lab results instead of just marketing buzzwords, that's a positive signal. So, how do you pull all of this together when you're standing in front of the shelf? Start with 3 simple questions. First, does the honey come from somewhere specific, or is it hiding behind vague, multi-country blend wording? Second, does the appearance and texture look like something that once lived in a hive, a little cloudy, maybe slowly crystallizing, or does it behave exactly like pancake syrup? And third, does the producer tell you anything concrete about testing, grading, or working with real beekeepers? If the answer to all 3 is no, it's probably time to put that bottle back. To make those questions even more practical, imagine you're torn between 2 bottles. One is a nameless plastic bear that just says honey and product of multiple countries, crystal clear and on permanent sale. The other is a slightly smaller jar that lists a specific region, maybe even the beekeeper's name, and looks a little cloudy with a harvest date on the back. The first one is convenient and cheap, but you're taking it entirely on faith. The second one might cost a couple dollars more, but you can see the story behind it. 9 times out of 10, that second jar is the better long-term choice for your body. You'll also hear a lot of home tests for fake honey online. Burn tests, water tests, matches, and so on. Some of those can show differences in thickness or additives, but none of them are perfect lie detectors. Industrial food scientists have spent years learning how to mimic the look and flow of real honey. Instead of relying on internet tricks, think like an investigator. Look at how the honey behaves over weeks. Watch how it crystallizes, notice the aroma, and pay attention to the label details and the company's reputation. Those patterns tell you more than a quick lighter trick ever will. Storage matters too. Even the best raw honey can lose quality if you treat it badly. Keep your honey sealed, away from direct sunlight, and at a moderate room temperature. If it crystallizes, that doesn't mean it's gone bad. It's actually a normal sign of real honey. You can gently warm the jar in a bowl of warm water to soften it again. On the other hand, if a honey product sits on your shelf for a year in a hot kitchen, never crystallizes, and looks exactly the same as the day you bought it, that should raise a skeptical eyebrow. All of this exists in a bigger picture. Honey is consistently ranked among the world's most commonly adulterated foods, right up there with olive oil and certain spices. That's because demand is huge, supply is limited by what bees can physically make, and the profit margin for stretching real honey with cheaper sweeteners is enormous. When you know that background, it makes sense that not every golden bottle deserves a halo. But it also means the honest producers, the beekeepers and brands that do things right, really stand out when you know what to look for. The goal here isn't to scare you away from honey. Real, unadulterated honey has been part of human diets for thousands of years. The problem is what happens when that tradition gets pushed through a modern industrial system that rewards cutting corners. The more you understand the tricks, heavy filtration, vague origins, anonymous bulk containers, and ultra-cheap blends, the easier it is to spot them and opt out. At Plate Safe Project, we're all about those tiny upgrades that add up over time. Swapping one bottle of honey might not feel like a big deal today, but over months and years, choosing foods with clearer sourcing and fewer unnecessary additives changes what you and your family are putting into your bodies. It's a quiet form of self-defense in a food system that doesn't always have your best interest at heart. If this breakdown helped you see your pantry a little differently, take a second to look at the honey you already own. Check the label, look for origin info, notice how it behaves in the jar. And if you spot any of the red flags we talked about, the anonymous bulk bottle, the super polished syrup that never crystallizes, the too good to be true price, maybe consider upgrading the next time you shop. Thanks for watching Plate Safe Project. If you want more deep dives into foods that look innocent but may come with fine print, make sure you hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who still thinks all honey is exactly the same. Until next time, read your labels, protect your plate, and stay curious about what you're really eating.